Last time.
He swung his sword, bearing it down upon the Red Shadow's head. A heavily confined sound echoed. He did it, but there was neither blood nor the screams Conway was expecting, even though the attack had certainly hit its mark. The Red Shadow's figure wavered and slowly sank down to its knees.
Here we go.
Slowly walking in exhausted silence, the two of them looked for a place where they could rest. Now, returning to a place where the void hadn't yet reached, they leaned against the root of a great tree, as if to hide. The fatigue made him feel like his feet sank into the ground whenever he took a step. When they finally sat down, both were silent. Asato grabbed his tail and looked at the wound on the tip, where a void leaf had sliced into it. His tongue, peeking out occasionally, was red. Conway pondered as he gazed at him unconsciously. It stood out against his dark skin and hair. It was like his tongue was a separate organism. You thinking about what that tongue could do, Conway, huh? Asato noticed and looked up at him. Their eyes met, and they just stared at one another. It's nothing. I was wondering what that was a little while ago. If it wasn't a cat, then I think it was a devil. But something was really strange about it, other than the whole devil thing. His tail swayed in agreement. The devil moved like a puppet, manipulated by someone else. Therefore, even though it had been such a spur-of-the-moment plan, they were able to pull off such an absurd attack. If they had misread the situation, they'd be missing their heads by now. Asato stopped licking his injured tail and looked up at that sky, lost in thought. Maybe that wasn't its true form. True form? The devil can scatter its power and make copies of itself. That's what I heard. You know a lot about this. Asato's gaze slipped towards Konaway. The Meiji worship those devils. Meiji? He'd heard stories about a heretical tribe that worshipped evil gods. That reminded him, when the Kirins faced Konaway, he heard them call him a Meiji spy. While Asato watched Konaway, his eyes slowly narrowed. The color of doubt reflected clearly in his eyes, and Konaway furrowed his brows. What is it? You really don't know? The sound of his questioning voice irritated Konaway. I don't. I'm just a cat of Kaoru, okay? He pushed his chin out and shot back those words, glaring sharply at him. Asato doubted him. He didn't know. He didn't know a single thing about the Meiji. His eyes were forceful, just like his words. Asato stared into Konaway's eyes for a while, but then looked away and sighed before long. I see. If it were a Meiji, what would you do? I'd have to kill them, for sure. Kill. Right. Asato had chased him from Kira to kill him. Why? Asato turned his face away, hitting the ground several times with his tail. The soil made a dry sound. Kira and Meiji have been at war since long ago. Meiji is waiting for a chance to destroy Kira. Didn't the elders say you were a Meiji, too? Look, I'm not a Meiji cat, okay? I know. But still. Asato furrowed his eyebrows and looked at Konaway with a sad expression. I will kill you. Konaway suddenly jumped back. He didn't feel any murderous impulses from Asato, but he did so instinctively. Asato lowered his ears sadly and didn't do anything more than sit. His expression left Konaway at a loss. I will kill you. Pronunciation of his words revived in Konaway's ears as he reflected on them. That is an awkward fucking sentence. Say Asato's words. Asato's words kept replaying in his mind. Put it that way. But his voice was tinged with something that went against the words he spoke. The eyes that stared at Konaway now didn't have any aggressive light in them. Konaway didn't know what to do. Why? Why are you making a face like that while you say you're going to kill me? Why? I don't really want to kill you. Really. Then why? It's an order, Asato muttered softly. He lowered his head and feebly swished his tail. The order of our elder is absolute. I can't disobey. Absolute? So even if you don't want to kill, you'll kill when you're ordered to? Asato nodded. What was he saying? He wondered this above all else. Doubt began to gradually turn into anger, and he frowned sternly. There's no such thing as absolutes. Only a Sith deals in absolutes. Sorry. Shit. Follow. It's very serious. Following the Elder or defying him, that's just your choice, isn't it? I can't disobey him. If I do, I can't ever go back to Kira. It doesn't matter if you can't return. It's not like you just can't live outside of Kira or something. I won't live. Huh? Asato answered him without hesitation, and Konowei's eyes widened. He didn't understand what he meant. The cats of Kira only know Kira. We can't possibly live outside of Kira. Like, what the hell does that mean? Who told you that? The Elder taught it to us, since we were young. These cats. Konowei stared at the black cat before him. His tail felt odd, as if it were numb. It wasn't a bad thing to honor one's traditions and bloodlines. Kira's elder probably did it to bring unity to the members of the village, but at the same time, it isolated their society. If someone died in such a small village, they'd never have known the outside world. The leader's words in such a small group were absolute. And because of that, well, it looks like Karu isn't the only fucked up village here. They had to obey. They had to fight. Otherwise, they'd be erased. The cats of Kira hadn't realized it yet. No, the problem was more fundamental than that. He felt a chill of resentment. He didn't care at all about that kind of village, and being killed by them was an unbearable thought. You. Konowei took a step closer after having jumped back from Asato. If you really want to kill me, then we'll just become enemies. But thinking you can't live outside of Kira is just an assumption, okay? Asato's eyes flickered with confusion for just a moment. Konowei continued while those eyes watched him intently. The Elder is wrong. Outside of Kira, the world sprawls out all over. Don't you want to know about that? The world outside Kira? Yeah. Asato was clearly panicked. He couldn't have considered the thought of leaving Kira before, and of course he'd never doubted the Elder before either. Konowei's words shook him thoroughly. And besides, Konowei looked down and opened his mouth again. You never looked disgusted when you saw me, and you saw what I looked like. Konowei. Konowei looked back up. That's why I don't want to fight against you. If the Elder wants me dead, he can come and get me. You don't need to listen to what he tells you. Asato's mouth moved as if he wanted to say something, but he bit back his words and lowered his head in the end, eyes narrowing. There was a brief silence. Asato seemed to be desperately trying to sort out his thoughts. It was like the world he lived in was turned upside down. Konowei patiently waited until Asato spoke. He looked upwards at the night moon, peeping out between the gaps of the thickly growing leaves. The light was thinned by the overlapping leaves, and only a small amount of it reached the gloomy forest. But for some reason, he felt entranced. How much longer until daybreak? It was the first time. His voice was forlorn. When you said I was pretty. Pretty? He wondered if he ever said that. Yeah, he did. When he thought about it, he suddenly remembered. Definitely. In Asato's room, he'd called his fur pretty, but because he really thought Asato's looked better, he just casually made that retort. I'm an outcast. Outcast? He asked again, but Asato kept silent, looking down with his ears pressed low. He looked as if he didn't want to say more than that. Don't you have a family? Or something that's important to you? None. Nothing dear to me either. There was no feeling in the voice that answered back. Asato's hand made a loose fist. There was nothing. He was the same as Konowei. Konoe felt like he could kind of understand how Osato felt. Yeah, you two do kind of make a pair, don't you? He had also said he was an outcast. That was probably why he was awkward while interacting with others. But because he understood how it felt, he also began to feel a little irritated. I was happy, and that's why I didn't want to kill you. Konoe slowly came closer to Osato and sat in front of him. He looked him in the eyes. That's why I keep telling you. If you don't want to do it, then just don't. I'm afraid. As if to avoid Konoe's gaze, Osato lowered his head and scratched at the ground with a single fingernail. I don't know what'll happen if I leave Kira. I'm scared. When he heard Osato's frightened words, he felt heat build in the depths of his mind. He answered back in a low, monotonous voice. It's the same for everyone, right? Right. It was the same for everyone. For himself, too. But even though he didn't know what would happen, he could do nothing but keep running. He too felt scared. He buried these feelings in the depths of his heart and kept walking forward. If he looked backward, he would freeze with fear. But Osato's words still struck him. Really, Konoe was afraid too. Was Osato seeing through him? Succumbing to his self-loathing, Konoe quietly sighed and turned his face away. Just do what you want. If you want to kill me and go back to your little village, then it's fine. Osato looked down to his feet, then raised his head up again after a few moments. His ears were still lowered. You left your village too, right? Yeah, I also can't go back. His tail moved closer, but he was still unsure if he should touch it to Osato's or not. Do it! Even though they were the same color, why did his own look wild and ominous? I don't want to lose. To what? They were just words that randomly spilled out. Even though it was a legitimate question, he didn't really know the answer, so he just continued to say what he felt. I don't know. I don't know what I'm fighting, or what I don't want to give in to. But if I give in, I lose. And that would be the end. That's the one thing I don't want. If I give in, I'll lose. Give in to whom? These questions rose from the bottom of his heart. Yeah, I get you, Konoe. It's not that you want to win, you just don't want to be a failure. If you give up, then you lose. Osato muttered to himself and looked down at his hand. His claws had left clear grooves in the earth. I'm afraid of disobeying the elder, and never returning to the village is scary, but I don't want to kill you or give up. Are you not afraid of anything? Osato spun his words little by little, turning his blue eyes straight towards Konoe. They were deep blue, like the sky illuminated by moonlight. Konoe steadily stared back as if to reach into their depths. No, I get scared. But even if you feel scared, that's okay. If you give up, that'll be the end of you, though. There'll be nothing waiting for you afterwards. I see. Osato nodded. His drooping ears perked up just slightly. Konoe reached out with the tip of his tail and slipped it around that brown arm, stroking it. Oh. Osato's eyes blinked in surprise, and Konoe smiled a little, mischievously. It might be hard for a weak person, but not for you, okay? You're capable. You can live outside of Kira, I know it, even if it isn't easy at first. Outside of Kira isn't some terrible hell, either. It's just, forests and water and soil, sky and other cats. Huh, I see. The sorrow reflected in Osato's face for some time now melted away. He smiled. Konoe sighed unintentionally. Osato's eyes turned down, but his ears perked up, and his tail shook in ease. I had thought that if I killed you, I would have never forgiven myself for as long as I lived. Even though it was the Elder's order, I don't like it. It was terrible. So, I won't give up on not wanting to kill you. That's an interesting way to say that. Yeah, that's kind of strange. Is it? Yeah, it is. Asato's genuinely confused face made Konway want to laugh. He suppressed it, and instead slightly narrowed his eyes. You're a weird guy. But you're my weird guy. He then put one hand on the ground and moved towards Asato's upper body, pushing the tip of his nose against Asato's shoulder, even as Asato moved backwards in surprise. It was a sign of affection, exchanged between friends. Asato's eyes opened wide, and he froze, overcome with surprise. Not thinking it was that shocking, Konway was a little confused. Then, Asato suddenly turned to a tree behind them and started to frantically sharpen his claws. What are you doing? Sharpening my claws. I can see that. I see. It just wiggled away. For a while, the dry sound of claws being sharpened on the tree continued. Konway didn't really intend to stop him. He leaned against the protruding root of a large tree, casting Asato glances of amazement and confusion. This is gonna be Asato's thing, isn't it? Where he just doesn't get affection. And Konway's gonna be like, God damn it! I just want my boyfriend to notice me. As he watched him, he thought, why did the red shadow attack them? Obviously, Konway was its target. Was it orchestrated by the third cat Fury had spoken of? And that was just a shadow, so they would soon have to deal with the devil's true form. He didn't understand. His irritation spiked along with his doubt. He was just one of the simple cats of Kaoru. Why him? Did you forget about the whole tattoos and dream sequences thing, buddy? Buddy? Oh. Are you sleepy? Asato asked him, and Konway opened his eyes again. Since when had he dozed off? In the corner of his mind, he felt sleep beginning to creep in. Asato seemed to have finished sharpening his claws, and the shavings from the tree he'd done it on were now gathered up in a huge pile at his feet. The victimized tree now looked miserable with its thin and exposed appearance. He looked up at the sky, which appeared to have traces of white. Dawn would break soon, but he thought he wanted to rest a little more. What are you going to do? Huh? After this, I can't go back to the village. If I don't return, a pursuer will come soon to get rid of me. Guess we're both hunted now, huh? He sighed, wondering what they should do now. Asato moved restlessly and turned his body towards Konway. The pile of tree shavings collapsed helplessly. What about you? If I go with you, I'll be okay, Asato muttered in a subdued voice. Though he had a bigger build than Konway, sometimes his timid behavior struck him as odd. He's just a gentle giant who occasionally goes on murderous rampages, I don't know. Still, he supported his decision. If he rejected the Elder's orders, they didn't need to fight. On top of that, he didn't know if something like that red shadow would appear again. He needed to work on his fighting skills. Above all, he didn't want to travel alone any longer. Asato's honesty was reassuring. Asato turned a timid and questioning gaze towards him. Well then, it's decided. We're travel buddies. Well then, it's decided. Let's be travel buddies. Asato's ears perked up and his eyes shifted towards him. His tail stuck straight out. After that, he turned around again and faced the tree trunk, raising his claws to it. More torment from his strong claws made the tree way too pitiful. What is going on with him? Does he have a panic every time someone's nice to him? And then he has to, work out his panic on inanimate objects? Christ. Konway used his tail to dust away the wood shavings around Asato, indirectly hinting for him to stop. Hey. Sorry. He purposely gave a lengthy sigh with an annoyed face at Asato, whose shoulders had lowered. But why did his heart feel slightly lighter? He felt as though some of the dark gloom engulfing him had been diminished. Just the idea of not being alone made him feel at ease. It was mysterious because when he was alone, he wasn't bothered by it, and even thought he was better off. After that, he rested his body and looked up at the trees surrounding them. The moon of shadow was setting to the left, which meant Ranson was straight ahead, where Tokeno should be, our little red-headed buddy. He wanted to get going as soon as the moon of light started rising. Sato insisted on keeping watch first, so Konoe had climbed high into a tree. He wanted to look out over a greater distance. Konoe sat at the base of a thick branch and leaned against the trunk. A magnificent sea of forest spread out before his eyes. It stirred beneath him like a living creature. While he watched, sleep gradually overtook him. He wondered if Hisato was also asleep. While thinking about these things, Konoe sank into a deep sleep.